issue was live in court. So this is guesswork. There's a possibility that IEBC was waiting for directions from the court, because this issue has been litigated in court. By the time the court was making an opinion that the National Assembly is not involved in regulations, I'm not so sure whether IEBC has now enacted them. But I'll also assume that probably they're in draft form, ready, but they are waiting the commissioners to come in and then officialize them. I tried to look at, in my research, I tried to look at the website, and I noticed that they didn't even have the current strategic plan. So probably it's one of the issues in the current strategic plan if the new commissioners come in. So my guesswork will be, I'm not sure the status. I don't know whether they're ready or not ready, but all I know is that the new commissioners will have to deal with the campaign finance regulation in the shortest time possible before the next election. Thank you.
Lastly, related to regulations, I think under the Statutory Instruments Act, the National Assembly normally says that all regulations have to be presented before them for approval before implementation. Yeah. Does that apply for constitutional commissions, and in this case, IEBC, that requirement?
Again, when you look at that ruling, and this is where many courts come up with different rulings on this issue, and sometimes Kenyans get a little bit confused. But unless that ruling has been appealed, I'll stick to that ruling. And the ruling was to the effect that IEBC has full mandate to prepare regulations without involvement of the National Assembly. So I will stick there. I'm not so sure whether the lawyers appeal or whether there's an appeal on board or not, but at the same time, I know how important it is, because the National Assembly are politicians and they are stakeholders. So I know how important it is to have stakeholders engagement through those regulations, because there has to be something called public participation. So my assumption then will be that when they came up, or when they will be coming up with the regulations, there will be some public participation, and that public participation will then involve politicians, and politicians will have a say, because you can't rule away the involvement of politicians. So as much as our law is very descriptive, as much as our judges stick to the law, because that's what they are trained to stick to the law, there is what happens in the machinani on the ground is different. So I think that engagement is critical, and that's why we have the Political Parties Liaison Committee, body under the law, which can navigate around these issues.
Thank you, and wish you all the best. Thank you, Chair.
Allow me to ask James Misati to take up and ask some questions.
Thanks so much, Chair. I also take the cue to also ask you a few questions related to the governance of IEBC, if you are given the opportunity to be the chair. During the elections, the scale and magnitude of the general election, hiring of temporary staff is usually inevitable. From where you sit, or from your experience, what do you think will be the risks of hiring temporary staff during that short period? And how do you propose to mitigate any of the risks, if any?
I didn't understand the question.
I'm asking you that during the general elections, like 2027, it's always almost inevitable that you have to hire temporary staff, the clerks and other people. So what do you think are the risks that are associated with such hiring, and what do you propose as mitigation of such risks?
I understand you now. In election and approaching election time, the work becomes too busy at any EMB. But because EMBs are limited, they rely on poll officials hired from outside, clerks and so forth and so on. Now you have 290 constituencies, and therefore you have to hire people to fill in the 290, to man those 290 constituencies. Now, the risk with that is cost, the cost implication. The cost implication of hiring, every polling station I think has 6, if my memory serves me well, 6 polling clerks, and you have a presiding officer. So if you take that, you multiply by the number of constituencies, and you multiply by the number of days that the election is being done. Normally it's done 3 days. It's a very expensive process. So the main risk of that is that it makes the election become very expensive. To mitigate, it will need serious stakeholder engagement to know whether we should continue hiring polling staff for the shortest period of time and spend so much money, or do we approach like other countries where I've seen public servants being recruited. Of course, they don't earn a salary to do the election work. That happens in so many countries, but then there's also a risk to